Cold environments have always posed unique challenges to navigators. This is because sea ice might restrict or control the movement of a vessel. Additionally, ice covers land, making it more difficult to recognize landmarks, and it prevents floating marks from being established. Because ice is found in high latitudes, the familiar Mercator chart cannot be used, so the navigator has to become confident with other types of chart. Polar charts sometimes miss detail, such as sounding values, because complete surveys have not been undertaken. A recent estimate said that only 10% of the Arctic areas have been surveyed to the same level as other parts of the world. High latitudes also mean that existing electronic navigation systems are not as accurate, putting a vessel's position in doubt. Magnetic and gyro compasses can also have large errors, making heading assessment difficult. Because of these challenges to navigation, a polar navigator must be able to protect their vessel, as well as the environment. Let's remind ourselves about the various ice formation and types. Click on the images to learn more. As the sea surface freezes, crystals of ice called spicules grow, which are known as phrasal ice when there is enough of them. This ice is without structural form, as the ice crystals are distributed in the sea surface layer. Depending on sea conditions, this may exceed 1 meter in depth. Phrasal ice gives the sea a thick texture and a matte appearance. As freezing continues, phrasal ice becomes sugar, which is an accumulation of white ice lumps that are a few centimeters in size. Eventually, the whole sea surface freezes over to form neilasse, which is ice up to 10 centimeters thick and forms a thin elastic crust. As neilasse develops, it can look dark with white patches. Falling snow will increase its thickness and cause it to look whiter. It is then called young ice, which is up to 30 centimeters thick. If young ice survives its first summer, it is then classified as old ice or multi-year ice. It has a bluish look to it in contrast to the greenish look of new ice. Old ice is harder, so the potential for damage to the vessel is greater. During the summer melt period, water puddles form on the surface of old ice, and small hills are then formed called hummocks. The illustration shows hummocks and puddles, as well as ridges caused by pressure or ice riding up. At the North Pole, there is mainly sea ice, in contrast to the South Pole, where there is land with ice on it extending into the sea. In other areas of the world, seasonal ice is found. Ice varies with local characteristics, but there is one characteristic that is common, and that is its ability to damage a vessel. All ice must be given great respect by the navigator and ship handler. Land ice is formed from hard-packed snowfall and often ends up sliding into the sea. The resulting floating ice shelf is permanently attached to the shore. However, as the ice front enters seawater, it can start to melt. Buoyancy and wave forces also break pieces off. Ice in a valley forms a glacier that can be extremely thick and advance seaward at a rate of up to 30 meters a day. Icebergs are pieces of ice with varying shapes that protrude 5 meters or more above the sea surface and have broken away from glaciers or ice shelves. They can be of great size and, when not tabular in shape, are described as blocky, a vertical-sided flat-topped iceberg in a block shape. Height to draft ratio is 1 to 5. Domed, an iceberg with a rounded top. Height to draft ratio is 1 to 4. Wedged, has one steep side and one gently sloping side. Height to draft ratio is 1 to 3. Pinnacled, means it has one or more spires. Height to draft ratio is 1 to 2. Dry docked is an iceberg with a slot or channel cut into it. Height to draft ratio is 1 to 1. One of the biggest icebergs recently recorded was estimated to be 11,000 square kilometers in area, and it broke off from the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica. Younger block or tabular icebergs are more affected by current flow than wind force, because there is more below the water than older ice, such as a dry dock iceberg. As with pack ice, an iceberg will drift in a direction that is the resultant of the forces from wind, Coriolis effect, and current. There is also a small force due to gravity, as the sea surface is not entirely flat. It is possible that an iceberg can travel through the water in a direction opposite to the wind. This may be because of a strong current, or because the iceberg has momentum in that direction. When an iceberg meets shallow water, it can ground and then be trapped in pack ice if the water freezes around it. Seeing a grounded iceberg gives some indication of the depth of water. Small pieces of ice often fall off an iceberg. A burgee bit is less than 5 meters high and approximately 20 meters in length, whereas a growler is typically up to 5 meters long. Both, however, are made of old hard ice. Here's a summary of what you have just learned. When water starts to freeze, it first produces phrasal ice, then sugar, and finally Nilas, which is an elastic sea ice cover. This new ice becomes young ice in its first year. If it survives the summer, it is called second or multi-year ice. Ice on land flows into the sea to form an ice shelf with an ice front. Bits of ice break off to form floes. Glaciers are frozen rivers that can advance seaward at up to 30 meters a day. Old ice is harder than young ice, but give all ice great respect, as it can be very damaging. Deep draft icebergs are more affected by current, whereas shallow draft icebergs are more affected by wind. Ice-strengthened merchant vessels are able to safely navigate in ice-infested waters, but there is a difference between them and a vessel constructed purely as an icebreaker. An ice-strengthened vessel is protected in several ways to stop damage. Between the loaded and light drafts, which is approximately where the ice belt lies, the hull needs to be strong to withstand crushing forces. A vessel has to be protected from large lumps of ice hitting the shell plating. For this reason, either it's made thicker in vulnerable areas or it is a high tensile steel. Mild steel can suffer brittle fracture, so it must not be used in vulnerable areas, such as those above the waterline where the air is often colder than the seawater. The International Association of Classification Societies devised a way of classifying vessels that are built for trading in ice areas. The table shows the IACS 7 polar classes. The Canadian government defined 9 classes that a vessel must comply with to be able to enter certain zones within their jurisdiction. These are generally called Arctic classes. Recently, for new constructions, they have replaced the Arctic classes with 5 new Canadian Arctic categories, which are designed for ice navigation. The Canadian government devised a system where the Arctic is divided into zones that are navigable by certain types of vessel and at certain times of the year. The table shows the 9 Arctic classes and 5 type classes with corresponding zones and dates. A type class vessel is a vessel ice-strengthened for navigation in ice-covered waters, but not for ice breaking. There are 5 type ships defined by the Canadians and a table to allow comparison of Ice Classification Society notations and Canadian type. The IMO have developed a polar code that has 3 ship categories that are very simplified and shown in the text. This is the part of an ice-class vessel that most mariners recognize. It is a wedge-shaped structure above each rudder to help protect it from ice when the vessel is moving astern. It stops ice getting wedged between the top of the rudder and the hull, and usually gives protection up to 2 degrees either side of amidships. An ice knife is usually a larger feature than a rudder horn, and it can be fitted on the forepart of a vessel as well as the stern area. It is designed to cut ice and when a vessel is backing to protect the rudder. An Arctic-class vessel is also fitted with rudder stops to prevent excessive loading of the hydraulic system with ice up against an off-centered rudder. The other noticeable characteristics of high ice class vessels are the shape of the hull in the bow and stern areas. There is often no bulbous bow and the bow section is commonly spoon-shaped, with the shell plating convex rather than the concave shape seen in a non-ice class vessel. There are several design features that can be added to sterns to protect the rudders and propellers. We have already mentioned the ice horn and ice knife fitted to the hull. A propeller nozzle provides some protection to the propeller tips. Deflecting fins or a wedge-shaped skirt are sometimes added to the hull in an effort to deflect ice pieces away from the propeller. Here's a summary of what you have just learned. A vessel can be ice-strengthened, allowing it to navigate in ice-covered waters. There are varying degrees of protection. Ice horns protect rudders. Ice belts protect the hull. Ice-class vessels are protected from brittle fracture by using specialized steel in vulnerable areas. The International Association of Classification Societies introduced the polar class. Canadian territorial waters have zones, which their defined type vessels can enter at certain times of the year. The Canadian government also has Arctic classes for vessels. IMO's Polar Code has categories A, B and C for ice-strengthened vessels. Experience has shown that in ice, 4 basic ship handling rules apply. These are: keep the vessel moving. Try to work with the ice movement and not against it. Do not go too fast, and know your vessel's maneuvering characteristics. The following preparations should be made before a vessel enters an ice field. If possible, obtain a route or advice from a responsible traffic control center. If there is no route, look for leads or open water in the ice. Post extra lookout and consider double manning the bridge watch. There must be sufficient light to complete the transit of an ice field, or the vessel must be equipped with sufficient high-powered and reliable searchlights. Reduce speed to minimum until the ice conditions are properly assessed. The vessel should be at right angles to the edge of pack ice to avoid a glancing blow, and choose the point of entering ice carefully, preferably in an area of lower ice concentration, such as an open or refrozen lead. Brief the engine room personnel, giving them the time ice will be encountered and what type of ice it is. Ballast the vessel to a suitable draft that offers as much protection as possible. When changing course in ice, if possible, do it in open water or in relatively light ice, as turning in ice requires substantially more power than turning in open water. Care must be taken when turning in an open water area, as the lateral speed of the stern can be surprisingly high, which makes it vulnerable to damage if the quarter makes contact with ice. The vessel will have a strong tendency to follow the path of least resistance. Turning out of a broken channel or lead may be difficult or even impossible. Backing in ice is a risky maneuver unless the vessel is designed for stern-first operations, as it exposes the rudder and propeller to ice. With the rudder amidships, it is protected by the ice horn. If ice starts to build up under the stern, use a short burst of a head power to clear it. The easiest way to avoid being beset is to avoid areas of ice under pressure, which commonly happens when wind causes open pack ice to close, or when water flow moves ice towards dense pack ice or land, closing up an open channel. Pack ice that has been under pressure for some time will deform, overriding as rafts or piling up as ridges. The top of a ridge is often called a sail, and can be 2 meters above the surrounding ice. But the base or keel could be several meters below, which means they should be avoided. The risk from being beset increases greatly in old or glacial ice, as the pressure on the hull is much greater. When in pack ice, a frequent check should be made for any signs of the channel closing behind the vessel. Normally, there will be a slight closing from the release of pressure as the vessel passes through the ice. But if the ice begins to close up completely behind the vessel, it is a strong sign that the ice is under pressure. When approaching a berth in ice-covered waters, monitor the distance and approach with caution, because variation in ice thickness can result in a sudden increase in the closing speed of the bow. Bring the vessel alongside with as little ice as possible trapped between it and the berth. Once alongside, do not allow ice to force its way between the vessel and the berth. Ice conditions can change quickly, so you should keep the engine on standby and not allow the rudder or propeller to become frozen in. Towing on a line in ice is possible, but it is not done in certain parts of the world because of the high risk. The tug master can have difficulty maneuvering when attached to a vessel in ice, and at times the strain on the tow line is much greater due to the sudden, unexpected movements of both the tug and tow. In Northern Europe, icebreakers are specially designed with a notch in the stern and heavy winches and cables to enable the bow of the towed vessel to be brought up against the stern of the icebreaker and secured. This towing method is known as close-coupled towing and is considered an efficient and safe method of towing in uniform ice conditions. Experience has shown that towing in ice requires specialized skills and specially designed equipment. The use of shock-absorbing tails or tension winches is recommended to stop tow line failure. Here's a summary of what you have just learned. Basic ship handling rules in ice are: keep moving, work with the ice, do not go too fast, and know how to maneuver your vessel. Before entering ice-covered waters, always prepare the vessel and crew for it. Set a safe speed and find an open area when turning. Avoid backing in ice to reduce the risk of damage to the rudder and propeller. If a vessel is beset, keep the propeller turning, try moving ballast to free it, or await icebreaker assistance. Towing may not be possible in some ice-covered waters, and berthing will take longer. The first principle of successful ice navigation is to avoid stopping or getting beset. Ice navigation requires great patience and can be a tiring business. The long way around a difficult ice area is often the fastest way to reach port or the open sea. Any expected fuel savings will be more than offset by the risk of damage. Remember that fuel consumption is higher when going through ice. Adequately powered ice-strengthened vessels are able to make independent progress through first-year ice up to 7/10 concentration, without icebreaker assistance. When sailing through open water, it is very important to keep a lookout for ice as well as using broadcast and published information. If the conditions are right and the sea looks oily, suspect that sea ice is forming, so tell the master and all departments on the vessel. Environmental conditions including darkness, fog and falling snow may prevent detection of ice. Position lookouts with binoculars and at night use searchlights for ice that is suspected to be close. There are several signs such as ice blink, the sighting of small fragments of ice in the water, and fog that indicate ice is ahead. Ice blink happens when light is reflected off ice onto low clouds. Radar is useful for relatively short-range ice detection. In calm conditions, it will detect ice edges and some icebergs at distances of up to 15 nautical miles. Remember that ice can be a poor radar reflector and that wedge-shaped icebergs can provide a very poor radar aspect. Along an ice edge, leads, which are open or frozen channels in ice, can be seen by radar at a distance of up to 3 nautical miles. Do not be misled by the poor reflectivity and smooth surface of a floe that appears to be a patch of open water on the radar. Icebergs normally have a high freeboard and are easy to detect visually. Depending on its aspect, ice can be a poor reflector, so the area of radar shadow behind an iceberg is a good way to detect its presence. As we saw earlier, an iceberg moves in a direction that is primarily the result of current. However, in general, growlers and burgee bits are mainly wind-driven and will stream to leeward of an iceberg. Because of this, it is advisable to pass to windward of icebergs. The closer the vessel passes, the more likely it is to encounter burgee bits, and a very close pass risks being close to the underwater portion of the iceberg, which can protrude some distance away from the visible edge. Growlers, because of their low freeboard and smooth relief, are the most difficult forms of ice to detect, both visually and on radar. In open or burgee water with good weather conditions, visual detection of growlers is possible at 2 or 3 nautical miles from the vessel. But detection with radar is possible only up to half a mile. In rough weather, the growler may not be seen at all in sea clutter, and visual detection is reduced to as little as half a mile. Because of this, growlers can be the most dangerous form of ice. An important principle when maneuvering in ice is to keep moving, but remember that if the speed of a vessel doubles, the energy stored rises by 4 times. Hence the potential for damage if hitting ice is much greater. Set a safe speed, which depends upon the ice conditions, the state of visibility, the ice type and concentration, the ice class, and the maneuvering characteristics of the vessel. If the vessel stops, keep the propellers turning to stop the stern area from freezing up. Here's a summary of what you've just learned. Ice navigation needs patience, but always look for an ice-free route first. When proceeding independently, keep a good lookout for ice, which includes using the radar to the best of its capabilities. Icebergs can produce a radar shadow, which indicates their position. Growlers can be the most difficult type of ice to detect. Set a speed that is safe for the prevailing ice conditions and range of visibility. No matter what part of the world your vessel is located in, it's very important to have effective communications with an attending icebreaker. The same applies to communicating with other vessels that are in a convoy. Once communications are established, follow the instructions for the success of the operation and the safety of all concerned. If there are any changes to a vessel's situation, inform the icebreaker immediately. The International Code of Signals contains advice on how to communicate with an icebreaker. Before working with an icebreaker, find out from the supervisory organization which communication methods are to be used. Here are some things you need to know when following an icebreaker. Progress of an escorted vessel through pack ice depends largely on the width of the channel made by the icebreaker, which should be wide enough for the escorted vessel to pass through without touching the sides. The width created through a large flow at slow speed will typically be about 30 to 40% wider than the beam of the icebreaker. At high speed, and if the ice can be broken by the action of the stern wave, the track may be as much as 3 times that of the icebreaker beam. The icebreaker decides what distance the escorted vessel must maintain astern of it. This allows both time to get through the channel before it closes up, and to be able to stop should the icebreaker unexpectedly come to a halt. Once this distance has been established, it is the responsibility of the vessel to maintain it. The maximum distance depends on ice conditions and how long the channel will remain passable. A large distance is safer, but it increases the possibility of the channel closing and getting beset, which would need a freeing operation by the icebreaker. With 9/10 concentrations or higher of pressurized pack ice, the broken channel will have a tendency to close quickly behind the icebreaker. This means keeping a very close escort, and it increases the risk of getting beset. When an icebreaker breaks a channel, if there is open water close by, the broken flows clear the channel with an outward movement. But in heavy pack ice, the flows have limited space, so they tend to stay in the broken channel. An icebreaker contacting ice floes may give them sufficient momentum to overcome the indraft at the stern. If this doesn't happen, floes will be drawn into the broken channel astern of the icebreaker. When an icebreaker proceeds at slow speed through ice, floes slide along its hull remaining largely intact. At high speed, the floes are shattered into many smaller pieces, thus reducing the possibility of damage to the vessel following in the broken channel. The higher speed assists the escorted vessel, provided it can maintain a safe distance. When a vessel under escort has stopped for any reason, the icebreaker should be immediately notified. If the vessel is beset, keep the propeller turning its slow ahead to keep ice away from it. The engines should be stopped only if requested by the icebreaker. Freeing a vessel that is beset during escort is usually done by the icebreaker backing down the track, cutting out ice on either side of the bow of the beset vessel, and then passing back along the vessel's side. The approach can be made on either side in moderate winds, but in strong winds, a decision as to which side to cross ahead will be determined by which of the two vessels is more influenced by the wind. On some occasions, the icebreaker may pass down one side of the beset vessel, turn astern of it, and pass up on the other side, thereby releasing pressure from both sides. Another way to assist a beset vessel is the free and proceed system, in which the beset vessel, once freed, is directed to proceed up the track made by the icebreaker in backing, while the icebreaker initially follows behind. The icebreaker then proceeds at full speed to overtake and pass the escorted vessel. This cuts down the number of freeing operations and improves progress. To free a vessel beset that was navigating independently, the icebreaker will normally approach from astern and cross ahead at an angle of 20 to 30 degrees to the beset vessel's heading. Icebreakers usually have blue identifying lights, and they also commonly use two rotating red lights to indicate when the icebreaker has stopped. As an additional warning signal, all icebreakers are fitted with an astern-facing horn, audible up to 5 nautical miles. During close escort work, always watch for flashing red lights and listen for a horn sounding, as this indicates that the icebreaker has come to a standstill. The master of the escorted vessel should treat these signals with extreme urgency and immediately stop the vessel if they are seen or heard. An icebreaker may stop or otherwise maneuver ahead of the escorted vessel without giving these warning signals. Masters must always be prepared to take prompt action to avoid overrunning the icebreaker or a vessel ahead of them in a convoy. Here's a summary of what you have just learned. Icebreakers are often identified with blue lights. Always establish the method of communication with an icebreaker and other vessels in a convoy. The width of the track broken by an icebreaker depends on its beam and the speed used when ice breaking. 2 red lights shown by an icebreaker indicate that it is stopped unexpectedly.